The terraces of Deir el-Bahri are built directly into the limestone cliffs of the Theban hills. For the earliest European explorers, the site was a mass of collapsed masonry and half-buried courtyards, hiding the identity of the person who built it. In 1829, Jean-François Champollion began translating the inscriptions found among the ruins. What he read contradicted everything he saw. Champollion was surrounded by statues of a bearded king in traditional royal costume, yet the hieroglyphs describe this figure using nouns and verbs in the feminine gender, as if he were a queen. This diorite statue illustrates the conflict. It occupies the seat of a pharaoh and wears the Khat headdress, yet features clearly feminine dress and physiology. Standing in the same temple complex is this colossal limestone figure. Here, the physiology is conventionally masculine, holding the crook and flail of kingship. These clashing signals, female anatomy in one instance, male in another, and feminine grammar throughout, created a discrepancy that modern scholars have struggled to reconcile for nearly 2 centuries. Early Egyptologists looked at this discrepancy and assumed it was a deliberate trick. They argued that Hatshepsut was hiding her biological sex, using masculine statues to deceive her subjects and secure a throne that wasn't rightfully hers. This perspective is a product of the Etic gaze. It projects modern, binary assumptions about gender and identity onto ancient objects, assuming that for the Egyptians, physical sex was the only thing that determined a ruler's image. If we look at how these images were actually produced, the deception theory falls apart. The artisans weren't hiding anything. They were following a specific set of religious rules to construct a multi-gendered identity for their king. To understand why Hatshepsut appears this way, we have to look past our own biases and examine the internal logic of the Egyptian artisan. Unlike Western traditions that value mimesis, or lifelike imitation, Egyptian artisans were not trying to create a photographic record of a person's body. They used a system of ontological modularity. Images were assembled from symbolic modules designed to communicate the metaphysical nature of a subject rather than their physical appearance. This image of Anubis demonstrates the modular system in its most basic form. The figure is built from 2 distinct modules, a human body and a jackal head. By combining these modules, the artist cites 2 different aspects of the god's nature simultaneously. The viewer isn't supposed to believe Anubis literally has a canine head. They are supposed to understand his multifaceted power. Because the pharaoh was a semi-divine figure, their image followed this same logic. A royal statue was a theological diagram of the office, not a portrait of the individual. In year 7 of her co-reign with Thutmose III, Hatshepsut transitioned from being a queen regent to a full king. This created a unique problem for her craftsmen. They had to account for the royal Ka. The Ka was understood as an inherently masculine divine entity. It is the spirit of the kingship itself, passed down through the generations, possessing the legitimate ruler at the moment of their coronation. For the first time, artisans had to represent a biologically female body that was now integrated with this masculine divine force. The shift toward masculine imagery was a theological requirement. It was the only way to visually signal that Hatshepsut now possessed the royal Ka. This wasn't a sudden, top-down mandate. We can see the chaîne opératoire, the step-by-step decision-making process, as master craftsmen negotiated this new reality. In the early years of the kingship, artisans experimented with how to blend these gendered modules on a massive scale. This sandstone sphinx shows exactly how they handled that negotiation. The face still carries traces of yellow pigment, the standard color for a woman's skin, but attached to that yellow face is a false beard, the masculine module of the king. These sphinxes were placed in the lower courts, accessible to anyone visiting the temple. If the goal had been to trick the public into thinking the king was a man, these blended, yellow-skinned, bearded statues would be an incomprehensible failure. Over the course of the reign, the artwork moved in a clear direction, from feminine experiments to a standardized masculine output. We can see this evolution physically in the sanctuary of Amun-Re. The base layer of the relief was originally painted a lighter pink or yellow, identifying the figure as female. Later, artisans added streaks of dark red, the standard color for a man. These paint layers document a live negotiation among craftsmen refining the visual rules for a female king. Eventually, the artisans settled on a solution. They decided that using the masculine module for the entire body was the most effective way to communicate that the person sitting on the throne possessed the royal ka. When an ancient Egyptian visitor entered Deir el-Bahri, they didn't see a single unified image. They navigated a multi-terraced layout filled with different versions of the ruler. Newer masculine reliefs stood alongside older statues that had been left entirely untouched. Deep within the inner chapels, the visitor would encounter seated statues with feminine anatomy. Moving to the outer courts, they would pass the yellow-faced bearded sphinxes. The public experienced Hatshepsut as a concurrent mosaic of gendered signals. The administration didn't hide her feminine identity, they layered it with her masculine office. When we rely on the edit gaze, we lose the nuance of the past. Modern labels like cross-dresser or deceitful usurper are impositions. They force a complex ancient system into a modern binary that didn't exist 3,000 years ago. To the Egyptians, Hatshepsut was a woman who had become a king. Her images show her exactly as she was understood, a person holding two different identities at once. Hatshepsut didn't break the rules of her society. She and her artisans mastered those rules to integrate her into the established order of pharaohs. Understanding her image requires us to read the stones in their own language, rather than forcing them to speak ours.